Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so thrilled. And oh my gosh, Nori is so beautiful. And I've just been sitting with it and absorbing it, and I love it so much.
Oh, thank you.
Releasing your sort of like first large book in a pandemic is a lot. How are you feeling? How has it been for you?
It's definitely been weird. But I'm very happy that Nori is out in the world. When I was making the comics, I always felt that I know Nori, and I was kind of exploring the city and wherever she is with her. I feel like now that the book is out, and I kind of feel like I'm traveling with the book, so it's a nice feeling, definitely. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I know for a lot of people, depending on their relationship to the editing process, and there's so many different things that go into putting out a book. Sometimes we can get kind of sick of the book itself, but Nori is so lovable, and the world that you have crafted is just so compelling. Is it always fresh for you?
Um, yeah, Nori, it's funny. I started off like basing the stories on my memory with my grandmother, but Nori became someone totally different from me, and she is kind of like my childhood hero. She she doesn't care what anyone thinks. She just goes to wherever she likes, and she's good at making friends in her own way. So yeah, um, it's kind of an adventure for me to follow her around in a
Yeah,
way.
absolutely. It would be like sort of making real an invisible friend or something.
Yeah, yeah, almost like that. Yeah.
When I got to the panel where Nori just punches a kid in the face, I laughed so hard. Like, Nori reminds me, when I was a little girl, I really loved Miss Piggy, and I still do to this day. She is my hero above all other heroes. And Nori reminds me of like a young Miss Piggy who just is headstrong and vibrant, and there's nothing reticent about her. She's usually not shy. She's really out there, embracing everything.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that panel. That's one of my favorite panels too.
um so when you're, I mean, because I am not, I write, but I am not an illustrator, I'm not an artist in that way. um that panel, like, can you take me through just sort of the creation even of just that one panel, because I think it's so evocative, and I'm so interested as to why that's one of your favorites as well.
Oh, just because she's punching the kid and also his tooth is falling out. I'm not sure if you noticed, but I thought that was the fun touch. But I do write with words first,
Hmm.
um, and I have a little notebook that I keep. And I just write down the storyline, the outline first, and then edit it a little bit, and then I start doing little thumbnails, very rough sketches with the layout of the panels and everything. And then I start tightening up the drawings. And then at the end, when I'm inking, I have a very tight pencil sketch at that point.
Wow, that's so cool. So you have written everything into being first, and then
Yeah.
that's so cool. So do
Yeah,
you?
I think a lot of people write in drawings. A lot of cartoonists. Not everyone writes with words, I guess. But yeah, for some reason I start with writing.
Do you think it's, because I know that you were doing translation before as well. So is there like are you really rooted in language and written word in, sort of like originally?
Yeah, definitely. I was studying literature before I decided I want to become an illustrator and cartoonist. So I don't really have a formal art training, actually. My education was mostly in literature. I love reading. I go to the library all the time, still in bookstores. Um, and yeah, reading and writing is an important part of my day, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I always draw with my writing. So when I'm taking notes too, at school, I used to always doodle in the corner, or try to explain things in drawing so that future self, my future self, can understand it better. um, so drawing was always part of it too.
That's such a gift from your past self to your future self is just like having, especially because like if you're, and I think, and that must be like one of the reasons why like this is such a vivid collection, I think, is that if you are creating these renderings in both written word and in illustration, that's I mean, all you need is sort of like, if you really wanted to, like, to just write your own songs as well, to really like bring all of the art forms together.
I really wish I can write songs. That's one thing I really envy of people doing. Play an instrument or something like that.
Yeah, that would be so cool. I wish. I mean,
Yeah.
I played clarinet growing up, but like
Oh,
I don't do it anymore. Yeah.
no?
No. I'm just not really, it's not like something I'm naturally really good at. I would have to work very hard to be even decent. And decided to work on other things.
It is difficult, isn't it? But I wonder if it's like riding a bike and you never really forget it. Like your body remembers it like a muscle memory. And if you do want to go back to it, maybe it'll come back to you and surprise you.
Oh, I think so for sure. Especially like I
Yeah,
never got my teeth fixed, so they still fit around the top of a clarinet. Like it's just
right.
everything is, yeah, I definitely can remember all my scales. Did you ever play an instrument at all growing up?
I did. I played French horn at school.
Cool.
That was very difficult. And I had to share the instrument. And I wasn't really into it, so I never got any good at it. But that was
Sharing an
yeah.
instrument is hard, especially when you play it with your mouth.
It's
That's
hard. Yeah, it's a little gross. So I didn't even have my own mouthpiece, so I was always like disinfecting it, and it was fun because I got to play an instrument, but it everything that entailed wasn't really fun, so it didn't last.
yeah, I can that yeah, that's especially in COVID times. Can you like just thinking back
Oh
of
my
all the things we used to take for
god.
granted? Oh,
Yes, yeah,
sharing a French
yeah.
horn mouthpiece.
I don't think that will ever happen, ever again.
No, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just like that's gonna take a while for me to. I love that. One of the previous iterations of your bio described your comics and illustrations as sometimes featuring friendly monsters and monstrous children. I love this. Can you
Oh, I like
tell?
that.
It was from your bio, so you definitely wrote that at some point. Tell me a little bit more about like how that concept informs Nori.
Oh, I actually don't remember writing that, but
But again, a gift from
but
your past
it
self
is
to
it
your
is
future
very
self.
accurate, I think. That's a good line. Yes, Nori is a little monstrous. But I think she gets to be monstrous because she's so little. She's tiny. So even if she's evil, even she can't really do much harm.
Hmm.
Whereas when as you grow up, you have to learn how to control yourself, or like even contain yourself, change yourself a little bit. But she doesn't have to do that at all because she's so small, and uh, she can't really get into a real danger as long as someone's watching her. Um, so I think that's a privilege of tiny kids.
Yeah. Well, and there's also something like, I mean, so many of the fairy tales and folklore, like all of that is really, a lot of that sort of comes out of trying to give kids an understanding of consequences, right? Like there's always
Right.
danger lurking everywhere, or they want to sort of try and instill some value system in children. And that, but there's also always, like, especially in really old stories, there's like this malevolence that is always at the edges, which I find
Mhm.
deeply fascinating and I'm very drawn to. How does that how does that interact with you as a storyteller?
I'm definitely fascinated by folk tales. I grew up in Japan, so I think naturally Japanese folk tales have a big influence on me, and I reference that a lot in Nori as well. Um, Especially with the animals. I think in Japan, foxes, rabbits, and raccoon dogs, they're kind of the usual animals that you see around, even in urban environments. My mom the other day said that she saw a deer in the
Wow.
middle of the street.
Oh my
But
god.
yeah, yeah. The animals are everywhere, even if you're in the city, and you don't really notice that. But even in Tokyo or Osaka, in big cities, so I think they are kind of, in a way, they kind of connect people back to nature, to like dark forests that like, you don't really know what's going on in there, but sometimes the animals comes out in the street, in the city, and kind of takes you back to that folktale world. Um, I definitely felt that way when I was growing up, so I wanted to integrate that in the stories as well.
Is there do you feel like some people feel very soothed by nature and other people um feel it's danger, you know,
Mhm.
lurking around the corner? Where do you sort of exist somewhere in the middle of that, or do you have an affinity for one?
Yeah, I think it's both. I love hiking. So I love hiking by myself, especially when no one's around. I feel like I own this place, or I don't know, it just clears my mind. It's inspirational. But I am very aware of the dangers, like real physical danger. I could like slip and fall, or like you drown in the river or
Yep.
whatever. So I think there's always immediate danger when you're in nature, um, in wilderness. Um, but it's definitely soothing as well. And I really need to be in nature sometimes, be away from the city, be away from everything. Um, it calms me, and it's also it inspires me. It's relaxing in a way that like nothing else can ever be.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah. I,
yeah.
that makes, I mean, I think I watched too much America's Most Wanted when I was a child, and I feel like every time I go camping, someone's going to murder me, and this is a problem. Like this is, but I also
that
feel a deep love
that
for
too.
nature.
Yes, definitely. There's a place in Kyoto which is really beautiful by a creek. You can take a walk there. It's like a little trail not too far from the city. But there's also a lot of sex offenders who go there, and it's it's a really sketchy place as well. So
You know,
um,
it exists everywhere, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, definitely. But I think I love all the complexity of all that. I think you never know what you're gonna get. So it's an interesting place to start a story.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's also so interesting, like the lies we tell ourselves about what keeps us safe and what keeps us like repressed, actually. I think about that a lot. And I think there's a lot of tales in mythology and folklore and fairy tales that all sort of blend together um, in that regard, especially with your background in literature, you know, and also just like growing up in Japan, as you said, but now you're in the States. Did you find a deeper desire in making art once you left Japan that really explored your cultural upbringing?
Yes, I actually partly grew up in the States in
Okay.
Atlanta when I was little. And then I went back to Japan and I mostly grew up there. But because I was moving around so much when I was little, at one point I was changing schools every year. Um, I feel like a sense of belonging is such a conscious effort
Yeah.
um, for me, because if you grow up in one place, you have that natural connection to the, especially the environment. Maybe your parents or grandparents grew up there too, so it's like the land they've been in for generations, and you're just arriving, and then you're just continuing the tradition. I feel like I don't have that, so I have to think about how I interact with the place or the people there, what I make of it, what it means for me to be there as an outsider, things like that. Um, and comics is a great way for me to explore that. I think by telling a story, I feel like I become a little bit, for example, American now that I'm here. I'm telling an American story about people who live here in America. So in that way, I become a little bit more American
Mm-hmm.
in my own way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, you consciously sort of set Nori in the mid 80s. Is, you know, why was that significant to you, to sort of help tell her story and the story of a very specific time period in Japan?
That was just when I was growing up. So 1986, Nori's 3 and she's turning 4. I was 3 and I was turning 4 too at that time. So I feel like I remember a little bit of that time period and what I felt growing up with my grandma around me. So I felt like I can base the story on the real emotion that I'm familiar with.
Yeah. And
Even though it's a fictional story, the emotions are real. So I think the emotions are really deeply connected to the actual space and time. So I thought it would be appropriate to set Nori in that time period.
yeah, both my parents worked and my grandma raised me. And so reading this, I was just like, and actually she's like still, she's having a sleepover in my home right now. Like she's having like she hasn't woken up yet. And she comes over and has a sleepover twice a week, or, you know, like to this day. And we're so close. And I just loved the representation of Grandma and Nori together and what they bring out in each other.
Yeah, that's amazing. So your grandma is staying with you right now?
Yeah, she's sleeping in the next room.
Oh, wow, that is amazing. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, growing up, my grandma was like my best friend, as well as a caretaker. And I guess in general, they're more chill than the parents because they don't have to work full time, or like they have more time for the kids, I
Mm-hmm.
guess. So maybe that's part of the reason. But I loved all the stories she told me daily, and it's a fun way to grow up.
It's an amazing way to grow up. And I think so much about like the relationship that can exist between a grandparent and a grandchild is so different than a parent and a child. You know, that like that one generation separation is so significant. And I know it can be complicated for sometimes the parent to see their own parent be such a better parent to their grandchild than they might have been to them.
Oh.
Like or just like, or not better, but like more lenient, or like just have like the friction is gone, right? And to like witness that, I know that that can be complicated, but I would love to just know a little bit more about your grandma, if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. So I had two grandmas,
Hmm.
and one, my mother's side, she died early when I was around three,
Okay.
so Nori's age. So
Yeah.
that was sad. But she was actually living with my parents to take care of me full time. So she's the first grandma that I grew up with, and then after she passed away, my grandmother on my father's side um, took over. So I have two grandmothers, but uh, I think they kind of spoiled me. My first grandma, she when she was driving, she would let me sit on the passenger seat. um I don't think you can do that now for like safety reasons, but if I wanted to, I could sit on the passenger seat right next to hers. And there was this like a driver seat toy, like a toy version of a driver's seat. So there's a handle,
Nice.
and you can honk and everything. That's also banned now, apparently, because a lot of accidents happen.
Sure.
But so she would put that over me on the passenger seat, and I can pretend like driving.
That's so
Uh,
fun.
yeah, but she was an amazing person. Both my grandmothers were single mothers, so they
Oh, wow.
raised their kids on their own. And they loved to study, they loved to work, but it was hard for them. Like, for example, my grandmother on my father's side, she one time she got a first place in school, um, on her exams. And every year the kid who comes in first place, they're awarded in front of the whole school. So
Hmm.
she was like so excited. But then it was the first time that the girl was got the first place, so they didn't want to give her the award. Instead, they picked the boy who came in second.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah, she would tell me the story over and over. And um I feel like I'm the first generation of women in the family who didn't have to experience all that. My mom was working, so I can like look up to her for like independent, um, life, leading a professional career and everything. Um, so yeah, definitely they were very inspirational for me.
Yeah. And I mean, it really, it does, it's such a nice, well, I don't know. I was sitting next to my grandma reading this book, and I was just, and like, it was really lovely to have that experience. And particularly when we get to the story that's set in Hawaii, and we meet this, you know, little 8-year-old girl who's lost her grandma really recently. And it was just like, weeping, you know, casually
Yeah.
outside while I'm reading the story. It's fine. No big deal. But there's so much tenderness and humor and history, you know, sort of like encompassed in this story. Why was the Hawaii story one that was like important for you to sort of tell?
Um, I wanted, in the book, I wanted Nori to do a lot of new things that are challenging for her, and discover new things, go on adventures. But I also wanted Grandma to have like a superhero moment.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember my grandma trying to drive. She came with us to Atlanta, And that was super challenging for her. She never left Japan before. And then all of a sudden she has to live in Atlanta because she has to take care of the kids. And she's the caretaker. Um, and everything was like a new adventure for her then. And one thing she tried, but she ended up not really pursuing, was driving. So I thought I wanted to let Nori's grandma do that and have fun driving, and have her own adventure moment. And
Yeah.
it's not just Nori, the little kid, who gets to have fun, but grandma gets to do that too because she's with Nori. Um, and I think that Hawaii story kind of evolved around that. I also wanted to incorporate the crazy economic bubble that Japan was in at the time. You can win a trip to Hawaii for real at like a local raffle. That doesn't happen anymore
Yeah.
in Japan when we're in such a long recession. Um, so yeah, there were a lot of things, but I think the main thing that I wanted um, to illustrate was grandma driving
It,
and having fun at it.
it was so fun to see those illustrations. It was so fun when they wake up Nori to observe grandma driving, and like the little trio of panels, which is like Sleepy waking up, the face going "Wah," and then going back right back to sleep. Like it's it was
And she kind of missed
perfect.
it.
Well, it's exactly what you would expect from like a 3 or 4 year old to just be like, cool, okay. And like, and not, it's gonna maybe live as like this sort of far away dreamy memory for her for like ever, but it's not, she doesn't understand she's witnessing something pivotal. And that's exactly, you want kids to have that sort of thing where they maybe don't make sense of these moments until they're much older.
Yeah, and definitely Nori and Grandma's world, they're separate, although they're so close and intimate. And they need each other in daily lives, but it's also separate. So there are a lot of things that Nori is not noticing, and Grandma's not noticing about Nori's life. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Why is it important for you to sort of depict that separation as well?
Oh, I don't know, but I think I it's always like that with anyone, like your best friend or your family. Um, you never really know their like the whole true selves. That's just not knowable, I think, just because you are in separate bodies and you have separate consciousness and mind and everything. um so I think it's just realistic, and it's something that happens. And I like inserting those little moments um in the story.
Yeah. I think it's really fascinating because I think a lot of people uh don't think about that very much. And this is where we sort of assume that there's like a universal experience that we all partake in,
Mm.
and there just isn't. And so I feel like you really understand that and embrace it, and not in a divisive way at all, but just honoring both of like these sort of separate interior journeys.
Yeah, I think that's why communication is so hard. There are so many misunderstandings, and you just have to be okay with it. So yeah.
A lot of people are not okay with it.
It's hard. It's hard. I get grumpy sometimes, and but then when I hear where the other person is coming from, I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think like we everyone, well, maybe not everyone, but a lot of people just like want to be seen if they feel like they've never been seen before. um did did you ever feel like you saw yourself in children's books or comics or illustrations when you were growing up?
Um, Sometimes, yes, in a way that I understand totally how that person feels. Um, but not necessarily, oh, that person looks like me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because growing up in Japan, all the stories are made for Japanese kids. So, but I looked a little different. My hair was lighter. It started going gray very early on. And I was really tall. I'm 5'7", and that's like the average male height there. Um, so I stood out a little bit. And when you stand out a little bit in Japan, where everyone looks pretty much the same, um, it's a little, it can be a little tough.
Yeah.
So but I did, when I was the story that hit me the most, I think, for the first time, was this story written in medieval times in Japan. And it was a story about a girl who kind of acted like a boy and a boy who kind of acted like a girl, and their parents thinking, oh, I wish we can just switch their gender so that they would be like more gender appropriate. And they
Mm-hmm.
actually do that. They raise the girl as a boy, they raise the boy as a girl, and then they grow up and they meet. And they of course have a difficult time growing up, because they they have to change themselves, they have to dress a certain way. And I was like, wow, I really understand how they're feeling, and this was written like 500 years ago. And
Wow.
I felt like time traveling. um I think that connectedness with the characters, that's like really powerful. And that's uh, I feel like I see myself in a story when that happens, and it's a really powerful moment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's incredible. Have you, like, now that sort of Nori is out in the world in a bigger way, have you heard from other folks who like have appreciated seeing themselves reflected on the page in this way?
Oh, I sometimes hear that, oh, that this reminds me of me and my grandma, and that's the that's my happiest moment
Yes. Well, I
these
mean,
days. Yeah.
100%. That is exactly my experience of Nori. Oh my God. Is Nori someone that you think you're going to continue to explore her life and her existence, and will she sort of stay? I mean, she turns 4 in the book. So are we going to grow up with her, or are we going to sort of like see her more in this sort of uh like I don't know, the what's it called when they're frozen in time? Anyway, where, or are we going to stay with her as this age?
For now, I think I'm finished with the Nori stories. I had this idea of Nori having a great year. 1986 was like great year for her, and a lot of things happened. And I feel like I let her experience everything that I had in mind. But maybe it'll be fun to see Nori growing up, like when she's 7 and then teenager. That would be interesting. So maybe.
I love so much like how she is this tiny agent of chaos. Like she's just, and she's running off in her like imagination, and she's running off into this sort of like possibly like mythical world, and she's also just like physically running off. So the people are constantly trying to make sure that she doesn't die. I really I love I love the fearlessness that she has on every level.
Yeah, I love that too, actually. I also think of her as like a traveler. So it's not always about her, but she makes a difference to people she meets as well. Um, so she's moving around, and whoever she meets who's stable, they get to tell their story too. Like when Nori meets a new friend, we get to know a little bit about them too. So I thought a lot about that while I was making the story. And I'm really inspired by no drama,
Hmm.
the traditional drama in no. And um, the plays usually have a structure where a traveler goes out in the world, and then they come to a place where something happened, something significant in the past. Like a young warrior died at this bay, for example, and their spirit is still lingering there. In the dream, the traveler dreams meeting that warrior, and the dead warrior gets to tell his story. um, I always thought that was really interesting, and it's a great way of incorporating dream too, which is um, a very interesting form of narrative. I think that we constantly tell ourselves like every night. Um, so I thought about incorporating that too in the story. So Nori, of course, she's like a fun fearless kid, but also she's kind of a mediator in a way
Hmm.
to explore other people's story.
And it's a really brilliant way to sort of like that entryway into that story is like I think that's yeah, I think that's genius. Like you know, especially traveling on the back of like an innocent 3-year-old into other people's lives, and that's brilliant. I love that.
It's a it's a fun way
Um,
to travel.
do y- like do you do you think there's a place for translating Nori to the stage? Like, you know, as you are inspired by no drama, like, do you think that that could happen?
Um, in contemporary 2020
Yeah.
world, yeah, definitely. I always think of no drama when I'm making comics. It's just a really interesting form of narrative with the rhythm, and it's a theater, so
Yeah.
the written words are written with action in mind, like dance or just like theatrical actions. So I think it's an interesting form of literature because you get to think about movement, and not just like poetry. And comics is kind of like that too, because you have words and the action, all the actions that you see in drawings.
Hmm.
So I think any story uh, can be kind of referencing no in a way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Well,
I definitely want to explore that.
that would be so cool, especially like having like especially like the ways in which stories can be embodied, you know, and then like brought to life in this way. And I can imagine like the vivid like art and the lighting and the dream sequence. I've reviewed a lot of theater in my life, and I just see this like as such a really incredible stage piece as well. I think that would be so exciting.
Yeah, yeah. I also just love action. My favorite movies are action with a lot of fighting scenes and car chases, things like that. So
So like a
there's
Fast
that
and the
as well.
Furious style, a Fast and the Furious representation of Nori's world could be a real marriage between seemingly disparate genres, but I think
Yeah.
that's cool. I also really appreciate it because you know, you've got these moments that exist that are giving your readers some context to place, you know, and also some context to the experiences. So when Grandma and Mr. Nakamura are having their conversation about Showa era Japan and World War II, And then the, you know, actual trip to Hawaii, like I found that really meaningful. And, you know, how much of that for you is lifted from the stories of your own grandmas?
Wartime stories were like some of the um, most recurring stories that my grandmas told, just because it was such a big part of their lives. And in a way, I think it still is in Japan. There are older generation still like affected by what happened during the war. It's affecting the landscape, the cityscape in Japan, because most major cities were bombed flat, and like all the buildings are newer. Um, so definitely, when you're living in those cities, you kind of you're reminded of it. Um, from time to time. Um, but yeah, I thought that I really need to incorporate that, because if you're living with your grandma in at that time in Japan, at least, that's the stories you hear. Um, so I think it's kind of like a intergenerational memory. When you hear it when you're a kid, it's just so vivid that it's almost like your own memory. um I'm sure you have a lot of stories that you heard from your grandma too, but like you kind of imagine it as you are listening to it, so it's like you lived through it in a way. um so I thought it's also an important part of Nori's life as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think about like the stories that obviously we lose, as generations pass on and become our ancestors, and um, how we record those stories and how they live on and how they inform future generations. You know, like there's definitely a lot of a lot of cyclical violence and trauma that uh, can carry on and manifest in new ways, you know, as we've seen already 60, 80 years later. And just trying to sort of like learn from mistakes, but also, you know, just honor the stories as well. So I think, and I think that there's something really wonderful in having like this as one of the undercurrent themes and foundations of this text.
Yeah. I also wanted to really focus on memory, because World War II in Asia, that's a very complicated story. Japan was invaded, but also we invaded other places, attacked, other places in Asia. Um, and that can be like a whole other book, or like a series of books, of course. So in Nori, I wanted to focus on grandma's memory and how that's like trickling into Nori's life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that there's, you know, the projects that you uh, might be moving on to at this? I mean, because, you know, Nori's been part of your life for how long? When was your
Oh,
first Nori comic?
for so long. Andrea, I think I first sketched Nori in 2013.
Wow. Okay,
Um,
cool.
and I wasn't sure what the story was going to be, but I was like, this is Nori, and I want her to be growing up with her grandma. Um, and so I finished working on the book last year, 2019. So I think 6, 7 years I was working on it.
Wow, that's a long time to sort of carry these stories. And how do you think, like, I mean, I feel like I observe, again, I do not have I'm not an artist, so I have less of a sort of observational eye than a lot of people, but I do feel like I observed some changes in your artwork over the course of the book. So how do you feel like your art changed in bringing Nori and Grandma's story to the page?
Yeah, I try to draw Nori and Grandma the same way. So I looked back at my older drawings, but it definitely changes um, just the way my hand moves, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I love inking with brush. And I use the same paper. It's a handmade watercolor paper with a lot of textures. So yeah, there are things that I try to keep it stable, and there are things that maybe I'm just getting a little better at drawing things too, because it's definitely getting faster.
I mean, that makes
So
sense. You know, it's a
yeah,
muscle and it's a skill and it's a talent. All of it combined, you get better and better and better at things, right?
yeah. I know exactly what Nori looks like, her proportions and things. So
Yeah. Did did you find that, I mean, I know that you write the story first, and I won't keep you much longer because this is already and thank you so much for all of the wonderful conversation so far.
oh, thank you.
But have you found that Nori, even though you write it first, that Nori ended up like sort of revealing things about herself to you in the stories as they evolved?
Definitely. I think I think for all my characters, I feel like I know them as a person.
Mm-hmm.
It's a weird feeling, but they kind of exist, and like I know them, and like I'm friends with them. Um, so yeah, in every episode, every chapter, it's a little different story. Nori's different, doing different things. Um, and when I draw her face, I actually do the face myself as well. Um,
Like just in a little mirror or just like
I don't have a mirror, but when she's smiling, or there's like a little evil smile, or when she meets like the homeless guy,
Mhm.
she's a little scared and stunned, and she can't really move. I'm like, yeah, I know that face. I do that face sometimes when I'm scared. Um, so so yeah, there are things that I discover while drawing, I think. Um, Not just drawing, but doing the face and kind of imagining as I do the drawings, because when I'm drawing something, I have to think about it so much that when I'm just, you know, just living my life, I don't think about it that deeply in three-dimensional um, sense.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but
It totally
yeah.
makes sense. It also, I think, when you talk about sort of the action element that you really love, and when I think about like the momentum and the motion and the vibrance that I feel in your illustrations, of course it makes sense that like you would embody and you would make the faces. Like that's that is maybe my favorite detail of any artist ever. Thank you for that. I really
Yeah,
really appreciate that.
I have studio mates. I share studio space with my friends in Brooklyn. I think if they happen to see me when I'm drawing, it must be a really weird scene. I
but
worry about that sometimes.
but like how cute. Off. Okay, it stopped. I'm so sorry about that. Um, I hope it won't continue. And my very, very last question is: so, if you are, done with Nori for now, what are you working on? What can we look forward to?
I'm making short stories, which I'm hoping it will be collected into a book. And there will be, I think, 7 different stories. And it's all the stories that I made since I came to the US. So it's like a collection of American stories. So it takes place in the South, in Georgia, and also in New York. The current story I'm working on is a sci-fi that takes place in the Mojave Desert in California.
Oh, wow.
And the year is 2099.
Oh, God. Well,
It's the end of the century.
have any sort of, have any travelers revealed themselves to you in your dreams? Like, are we going to be able to figure out sort of elements of what the future holds in exploring your 2099 sci-fi story?
Oh.
I'm not asking you to out yourself as like a soothsayer or anything. I'm just
So the premise of the story is that the dark energy in space, the scientists figured out how to harness it and use it for transportation. So apparently the universe is expanding, and we don't know what's causing the expansion, but we know that there's this energy, this unknown energy, and it's called dark energy right now. So in the story, it's discovered and like they can use it. But the story itself is about the outdated motors, so electric motors that we see every day now. It's so outdated, no one uses it, but it's only used for recreation, and these nerdy motor geeks are are playing around with it, having a race. So it's not a very serious story. It's very playful.
Good, great.
It's a lot of fun.
And action oriented, it sounds.
It's very action oriented. It's about the race, all kinds of vehicles. But I guess you can get a little glimpse of that 2099 world. Of course, the imagined version of it, how it is, how people live there. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything that you want people to know about Nori, or any information you'd like people to share or to know that we haven't shared yet?
Oh no, well, please get a copy from your independent bookstore, your local bookstore.
Absolutely.
And I hope everyone enjoys reading Nori and spending time with her.
Honestly, you'd literally have to be soulless to not enjoy Nori. So everyone who has a soul, get on that. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to you.
Thank
And
you. It
thank
was
you for
really
the
lovely.
questions.
Oh, thank you. It was really lovely to speak with you. I appreciate it so much. All right. Have a good day.
You too. Thank
Okay.
you. Bye.
Bye.